Hi, everybody. My name is Mark Cunningham. I'm a community manager, project manager, and other things here at Frederickson Learning. I'm really excited today because we get to try something new. We're kicking off this series of events that we're calling Emerge. And we have a great guest here, Jason Berry, who's going to join us for this maiden voyage. Um, I wanted to spend just a couple minutes talking at the top here and going through some housekeeping items. Um, so like my time supporting the production of Frederickson community events has afforded me a lot of opportunities to meet really smart, really interesting people in a variety of L&D roles. And some of my favorite conversations with these folks have happened behind the scenes as we're either preparing ahead of time for how the session's going to go, or when we're hanging out while people are in breakout rooms, which does happen. And it's in these candid moments that I got to kind of see a different side of these learning leaders. And it's why I wanted to give this series a spin. So today is our first attempt at bringing some of these more informal, free-flowing conversations to you while giving you an opportunity to participate in them as well. Throughout Emerge, I will be connecting with people across the L&D community at all stages in their learning leader journeys. And you are here because you're a self-aware bunch who recognize the value of outside perspectives, who value the chance to ask questions of someone who understands your challenges, but benefits from a lifetime of experiences different than your own in a professional context different than your own. And you're here because you know that the sharing of these perspectives is one of the best ways to trigger insights that will help you learn and grow. My hope for today is that you walk away thinking about trying something new and that you walk away smiling. And I also acknowledge you may be here because you're a friend of Jason or mine, which is as good a reason as any to be anywhere. But thank you all for being here today. Before we jump into things, let's do some quick housekeeping items. Thank you, Luke. So Frederickson Community Events is one of my favorite things about the organization. There's certainly lots of other parts to the organizations. We're an L&D agency and consultancy, and we do all of the things you see on the slide. And when you really ladder it up, what I like to say is that we help people in L&D function solve problems. So if you have a problem, please, we encourage you to reach out to us. And there's a good chance we can either help you or a great chance we can connect you with someone who has been in a very similar situation. All right. Speaking of community events, we always have a big slate of stuff that's coming up in the variety of communities that we host. We last year we started an L&D happy hour. I think we've seen many of the folks on this call there. If you're in the Twin Cities, it's the first Thursday of every month. We have people to our office to just hang out, network, chat with people, have fun. No sort of topics or presenters or anything like that, but a good way to grow your L&D network, and they've been really fun so far. This we just did the one for March, and we happened to also do a wine tasting at the event. We also have a few other more traditional community events coming up, a roundtable for learning leaders, that groups for people in learning leader roles. We did a data and analytics cohort last year, and we're going to be doing an experience share, and we'll hear stories from people who participated in that cohort. So we're excited for that. We have a healthcare learning leaders forum that will happen on April 15th. You can see the topic there, and then a sales enablement circle that's happening at the end of the month as well. You can reach out to me, to anybody at Frederickson, or the email down to the right if you're interested in participating in those events. I also want to say quickly, I am excited. I recently found out that I'm going to be going to the ATD International Conference in Washington, D.C. in May. So if you happen to be going, I would love to hang out with you there. I would love to hang out with you in Minnesota too, if you live in Minnesota, but it'd be fun to travel. We also have Jill Stanton's here on the call, and she'll be presenting at that conference as well. So please let me know if you'll be there. All right. So today, we're this is sort of how the session's going to work. I'm going to introduce our guest. We're going to try to explore kind of three major themes that he and I have sort of talked about ahead of time. And throughout the time, we really encourage you to raise your hand. I'll be keeping an eye on it here, and break in and ask questions as well. We want this conversation to really help be steered by you. So please feel free to jump in if there's really something you want to hear answered. We are recording today, and we'll share that out with some folks who can't be at the event and our YouTube channel where we post all of our community events. Okay. Super excited to have Jason Berry here as our first guest in this series. He's held some different learning leader roles in his career. Right now, he's the director of talent management at Nolan Transportation Group, otherwise known as NTG. You're going to get to hear a lot more about who he is and what he's done as we go on here. So I'm going to jump right in. And Luke's going to cut the deck, and we're going to spotlight Jason and I, and we'll get this going.
Yeah, look at those
Jason,
stats.
thanks for being here today.
Of course. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
The first thing I think I want to ask you, just to set the table for folks, is can you just say a little bit about the evolution of your own learning leader journey and sort of where you started and where you are today?
Sure. So, depending on how far back I want to go, I mean, I had started my career really in sales and sales management and things like that. So, I think that has always benefited me because I've been able to approach things from kind of a sales mindset. So, selling learning development to executives and leadership and things like that and getting them to buy in on why we need this. I think the sales background has always served me well. But if I go back far enough, I was a soccer player and I was a soccer coach and things like that. So I think that's probably when I sort of unknowingly realized I really like teaching others and leading teams of people. So um, since then, I was at my last company for 13 years. The last 8 to 10 of it was spent on the learning development side of things, training new hires, doing continuing educations, leadership development, all of those kind of things. So that's I'd say I've been like consistently at it now for about 10 years.
Cool. And say a
Yeah.
little bit about the role you've got now and your responsibilities at NTG.
So the role now at NTG is I'm tackling quite a few things here. There is they don't have a leadership development program in place right now, so that's kind of my first priority is building something out that makes sense for, we're starting small with their sales leaders to get them kind of up to speed. They hire a lot from within. They have a lot of very young leaders. I mean, you're talking like a year out of college and somebody gets promoted to a sales manager role like that young into leadership. Um, and then combine that with also rebuilding and um, adjusting their new hire training and their sales training. Again, that's where that sales background really comes in handy for me because I can tackle both of those. So those are probably our two main focuses right now. And then that leadership program will ultimately become much more of like an emerging leaders program. I'll scope it out to where we're starting to tackle more of those middle level and like director level managers as well. And then along with all of that, also working on launching our mentorship program, getting our review process up to speed, calibration, succession planning, like all that good stuff. So there's a lot. I'm doing a lot, but it's fun.
Awesome.
It's fun getting your
Yeah.
hands dirty.
Yeah. Well, and I see if you all don't know, Jason's a great follow on LinkedIn. He posts a lot, and it's easy to see that you've been up to quite a bit in your first months here at NTG. So
I've
that's
taken
fun.
I've been here 90 days. I've already been on I think 12 flights. So
That's crazy.
yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about leadership training. It seems like an area that you're passionate about, and it maybe sounds like in this situation you didn't necessarily have to make a case for the need, but just for the folks out there, uh, how would you recommend going about making the case for leadership training to an organization?
Yeah, I think, I feel like there's always one of two buckets, right? There's the organization like the one I'm in now that has realized that they desperately need it, and so not getting as nearly as much pushback as you might. And then there's the organizations that are looking a little bit more short term and don't. It's tough for them to wrap their mind around investing the time in something that they don't see an immediate ROI from a numbers perspective, right? So, some of the things that I typically look into when we want to pitch the program would be, Glassdoor reviews, engagement scores, turnover data. Like those are kind of my big three that I'll take a look at, and comparing with similar companies within like their industry, starting there, and just really getting them to understand that the only way we're really going to get like these engagement scores up, the only way we're going to get Glassdoor reviews or the CEO approval score, if we've got high turnover, like that stuff comes from leadership and development, and realizing like the more you invest in your people, the more they're going to want to actually stay and grow their career with us. So it's really hitting on those and being able to come with numbers, right? Like I can't just say like our Glassdoor reviews are low. Like actually have data and be able to compare it to other companies and things like that. So those are
Yeah.
probably the big three.
Yeah, well, and you dipped into the topic of metrics, which is interesting to me. So I know they're like, I mean, it sounds like Glassdoor is your go-to for that kind of data. I know there's a variety of like different types of websites out there that do that kind of thing. You feel pretty good about Glassdoor as sort of a source of information.
It's okay. I don't think it's like ideal. In general, like online reviews, I feel like tend to be the usually the people that leave online reviews are the grumpy ones, like they're so upset that they go leave a review.
Hmm.
But I do think it's still, no matter what, whether I love it or not, employees look at it and they do go check out our Glassdoor scores and they see if we've had a bunch of like 1-star reviews. And so it's sort of a necessary evil, right? You get kind of like probably Yelp is for restaurants, where you do want to at least have that score be fairly representative of what you believe like your culture and stuff is. So being able to do stuff like encourage newer hires or people that are really enjoying their time at work to go leave a review when they're happy, I think there's nothing to lose from it. You know what I mean? It's only going to boost your score and help kind of that external view of your company.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm not gonna like deep dive into the tactics of Glassdoor, but when you jump into that, you're kind of looking at maybe like an average rating and then reviewing some of like the anecdotal comments that you're seeing. Is that sort of what you're
Yeah,
doing?
and I think it's important to have some people that are at the ready to be able to reply to some of the reviews on Glassdoor, both the good and the bad of, hey, thanks for the nice words. Like really appreciate you commenting, but also if something is truly concerning, of having somebody reach out and say, give them a lifeline of who they could reach out to at the company to talk about it more. Because no matter what, it at least shows that we take the reviews seriously and we're aware of what people are saying, and you know, to also legitimately make sure that like they can, if you're going to say, reach out to our HR team, that you're actually going to answer them too when they reach out. So, because otherwise they could just go back on there and leave another nasty review. Uh, I reached out, like they said, and they never answered. So, yeah, I mean, we check those at least weekly. I think it's important to stay on top of it for sure.
Yeah, awesome. Um, Okay, so you talked about the two buckets of types of company when it comes to the need for leadership training. So in the position you find yourself in, it's probably more on the side of like, oh, we really need it. Where do we start? We need everything right away. Kind of mentality. Talk to me a little bit like strategically. You join this organization, they have this thing that they need started that they don't have right now. Just how have you sort of digested and sort of started to action on what needs to be done?
Well, one part of that is all that travel I just mentioned. I've been going to every branch location and just sitting down and having either focus groups or one-on-one conversations with the leaders, the employees on the floor, um, people like that can give me the real feedback. And my plan in general is, L&D tends to be sort of the like long win game, right? Like we've got to create the content and roll out the program and then track the data that comes after to see if it's working or we like the results. But I think there's little wins that you could implement along the way that really show people that this isn't a guy just taking us through another round of conversations where we tell them how we really feel about things and then nothing ever happens. So being able to find just those little wins, that's why actually like our leadership program here, I just started in December and it's gonna launch in April. So it's launching quick. And that'll be a 6 month program, but it's instead of trying to immediately focus on the entire company, it's finding the group of people that we felt like needed it the most and starting there and then being able to build it out from that point, right? So I think it's really critical and crucial to find some little wins that they can see along the way that show that like their feedback is being heard and what's coming.
Yeah. If you don't mind, say you can decline if you want, but what is that group of people that you identified having sort of the biggest need?
So right now it's going to be our younger sales leaders. So
Okay.
the people that are, again, I think it's amazing when companies hire from within and promote from within. The probably negative that can come from that at any company is that you also sometimes forget that just because they've been here and they know the company, that they also still need development on how to lead a team or lead people for the first time. And you run into those situations where you've got this younger person, maybe they're a year out of college or a couple years out of college, and they show the skills needed to be a leader, but then remembering that you're asking them to now manage the people that they were like getting drinks with last weekend. And that they were buddies with. They may have recruited their friends over to the company, and now suddenly they're going to be managing their friend. So that group, I think, tends to get forgotten a lot. Probably the second most important group, I would say, just while I'm thinking about it, would be your kind of like middle level managers that have been doing it for a few years that aren't like your VPs, that aren't your new managers. And that group, it's sort of like the middle child, like they sort of get forgotten because you're trying to hit the big ticket items first. But for the most part, the bulk of our leadership team comes from those newer managers that are touching the new hires the most, right? So that's kind of where we made that decision of let's focus on them first because they're also impacting the 300 people we hire a year that are coming through the doors immediately. So
Yeah. That's an interesting idea about the middle the middle management where it's like when you neglect a group, they can get really comfortable and then maybe like complacent. I don't know, but do you have any thoughts on that?
well, no, and it's it's I wouldn't even call it complacency so much as just I think it's easy to forget that people that have been doing it for a few years or have been doing it for a long time also still want and need development. Nobody's perfect at this, and it's why I love like stuff like this too, is whether I'm the one talking or somebody else is talking, like, there's always something you can learn from it. And so having these middle managers, I mean, again, there are oftentimes people that were promoted from within. So yeah, they may have ultimately become a really good like frontline leader, but then they get promoted to a senior manager or a director level, and they don't know how to handle budgets or how to manage other managers, things like that. So I mean, it's an entirely new skill set, right? So
Yeah,
yeah,
and then like I guess also the question of like how do they grow and continue to be engaged in the company, right? And like what is the
right.
path for them too? Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you want them to stay. Like you want to, I mean, for lack of a better phrasing, invest in your people so they're equipped to leave but willing to stay. You know what I mean? That's
Yeah,
kind of how I try to think about it.
for sure. Um, so there's like a lot of different components of leadership training, right? Like there's emotional intelligence, there's coaching, there's performance reviews and feedback giving and all of that. Um, how do you go about sort of diagnosing and prioritizing what an organization needs to focus on?
So those conversations I talked about, that helps the most because I can start and they're exhausting, like going branch to branch and having back to back to back all day focus groups and things like that with people, but being able to ask questions from the leaders of, how do you know you're doing a good job? Where do you feel like you lack in certain skills? And then being able to ask their leaders similar questions about them, being able to ask the people that report to them similar questions like, where do you feel like you get good leadership from your leaders? Where do you feel like there's gaps? And you start to just see trends as I've been to so many locations now that really I kind of the same 3 to 4 things come up every time. So knowing those are where we really need to focus and spend our time first because we can't get to everything. And then being able to, like in the context of these sales leaders, that also needs to be able to kind of fit in with developing their actual skill set for their specific role, right? So in this case, like role skills so that they can become better at both. Because that's really what we're trying to do is, incorporate things like positive feedback and crucial conversations and like things like that, but also make them more proficient at their day to day.
Yeah. What are those like 3 to 4? I think maybe you just mentioned a couple of them, but what are some of those common things that you usually see?
Well, difficult conversations is like number one because they're just purely afraid to. Again, I mentioned it before, but suddenly you're managing your friends. And then maybe you have to write somebody up. Who knows? Like it's nobody wants to have that, even if it's something simple like you've been late 2 days in a row and you just need to chat with them about like what's going on. Those are terrifying for a new leader, and it's easy to forget how scary those conversations are when you've been doing it for a long time. Um, I would say another big one for us is understanding team dynamics and that you can't manage everybody the same way, right? Which is also, a lot of times you'll see a young leader that like they got to where they are because they work really hard or they always work extra hours or whatever the case is. And not everybody's motivated by those same things, though, whether it's money or maybe they're motivated by work-life balance or who knows, right? But actually being able to understand what specifically motivates the people on my team, how do they respond to different coaching and making sure you approach it. And also adding to that, what's my own coaching style, like being able to understand myself. How do I come across to people? Being mindful of maybe not everybody likes dad jokes or whatever the case is, or sarcasm, or who knows. But those are, I'd say those are two big ones, like the difficult conversations, the understanding the personality types of your team. Um, and I think kind of hitting on both areas is just actually structuring your day to day as a leader and knowing what's important, what do I need to address right away, and what are the things that can wait? How do I prioritize my time so that my people can rely on me to be there for them, but also get the things done that I need to get done. Those would probably be my big ones.
Cool. Before I move on from leadership training, I did want to ask, is are the metrics that you mentioned earlier on when you're, making that case for the need for leadership training, are those the same ones that you kind of lean on when you're trying to demonstrate the value of the programs you put in place, or is there anything else that
Yeah,
you?
for the most part, a big one I'll look at is, and it depends on the organization, but a big one I'll look at is turnover. Are we seeing people stay longer? And it's not just employee retention, but also leader retention. Because typically the leader retention gets better too if they're also receiving the skills and development they need to turn this into a career, not just a job. So that would be that's probably my number one, along with, we do still, of course, look at engagement scores, making sure that they're also actually implementing the stuff from the engagement scores. But then, if it's since I've been talking about sales leaders, I also do dig into like, are the actual sales numbers of their employees starting to look better too? Because that's what we're always coaching good leaders to be good leaders, and that's kind of role agnostic. But then you also need to dig into what makes them successful in their specific role. And so if it's like a sales role, I want to see that their salespeople are being developed because that's what the leader should be doing is developing their people. So some of it becomes a little bit more role specific.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to another topic. I know this one's been very relevant for you recently, which is that of career transition.
Yes.
Um, and it's something I think, all learning leaders, all people in L&D have to be kind of, prepared for. And it's one of those things where like when you're in the middle of it, it's like a very emotional experience. So like if you can have some sort of framework or you can
Yeah.
unplug from like the emotions of it, it can serve you well. So why don't you tell the group a little bit just about this change of roles that you've had recently to start off with?
Yeah. So I mentioned I was at my prior company for 13 years. I'd had 10 roles in that time, grown a lot with the company. They're actually the reason I was able to move back to Chicago. They moved me here for a role. And in October, I was one of quite a few people that was laid off at that like director level, like senior manager, director-ish level of employees that had to cut costs or whatever the reasoning is behind it. Which I guess for lack of better phrasing, like being laid off sucks. I've been there twice. Um, and it is, it is scary, but it's also, I know for me specifically, it was a good thing because I had been there for so long and I had poked around at the idea probably over the last year and a half of like, I wonder what else is out there. What else could I do? I'd love to take on some new challenges because I had stuff so well like built out and just kind of running smoothly there. And so even though I had looked around and I'm always somebody that is willing to take a risk or do things, like I don't think I really was like committing myself to seeing what really existed in the market. And so as funny as it seems, like it was probably the push I needed to really go out and kind of, I don't know, refine my voice a little bit, refine like my energy and my passion. So I mean it's worked out for me, so I can't say I'm like bummed. It still stings if you think about it too much. Like, it's hard to not let those thoughts creep in of like, I can't believe that happened. I was there for 13 years, like feels like a big F you or something like that. But I don't know, holding on to those thoughts, I just don't think does you any good. And I don't ever believe in burning bridges. I don't want to hold any ill will. I learned a ton from the people while I was there. I'm honestly still even in contact occasionally with my direct leader that had to be the one that told me I was being laid off, and her boss. So, you know, again, it stings, but I just don't ever really see the benefit of holding on to those negative. I'd rather take those negative feelings and put them towards something positive, like what I'm doing now.
Yeah. I mean, clearly you're someone with a strong ability to kind of reframe, which I think is just really, really cool and turning losses into wins and times of misfortune into opportunities. That's super awesome. Uh, so I talk to people, people, there are layoffs, people need to find new jobs, that kind of thing. Editorial comment and perception I have is that finding jobs sucks. What advice would you have for people in this industry, maybe looking to navigate themselves towards the learning leader position and in a situation like yours, what worked for you?
So here's what worked for me, and I don't know if this is, it's not controversial, I don't think, but I know it's not everybody's approach, but I just hate sitting still. So, I mean, I actually found out on a Sunday that I was going to be laid off because my manager, she called me directly and was just like, I didn't want you to have to come in with everybody else and like go through it, which I really appreciate her doing, giving me a heads up. And um, so literally Monday morning, like I allowed myself like Sunday evening to feel sorry for myself. Monday morning, I went in and grabbed my stuff at like 6 a.m. Um, and got out of there. And then I came home, opened up my laptop, posted on LinkedIn that I was laid off and that here's the work I was looking for, here's where my experience is, etc. And just immediately like started pounding my network and Um, those things. Like I just don't like to sit still. I knew if I just like a lot of people say, like, well, take advantage of it. You've got the time now. Like just go allow yourself to relax for a few days and then jump into it. And I was just like, I guess like screw that. Like I'm just gonna get right at it because otherwise I'm just gonna sit here and feel sorry for myself. So um yeah, I made that post. I if you guys saw my calendar for the first couple weeks when I was laid off, it was legitimately packed with conversations of probably 5 to 6 to 7 scheduled meetings every single day, just wanting to talk to somebody. Maybe they knew somebody that knew somebody. I don't know that I could ever emphasize or overemphasize enough the importance of networking and like meeting people. Like even if, if it was you and me talking, Mark, like the conversation isn't there so that I can hope that you have a job to give me. It's just that like A, I'm gonna feel better if we talk about it. And B, who knows? You might know somebody that's like, oh, I actually know somebody that's trying to hire for this role, and Jason would be a good fit. And because I had that conversation with you where other people didn't, like that bumps me to the top of the list. Um, so I did that. That's when I really, really picked up my LinkedIn engagement of posting every day. I actually It only lasted 3 episodes because my run was short, but I started a little podcast I called Vulnerability because I was vulnerable and available. I like play on words. And I was just having conversations with other people that got laid off, and we were just being open and honest about it. I think it was a good place for people to see that like you're not in this alone, and you've got help out there. And then finally, I would say I was also, there's some luck involved. I was only unemployed for 1 month, which is not the normal. I know that's not the normal story. And I would never pretend that like I'm such a genius networker that I was able to do in 1 month what sometimes takes people a year. Um, right place, right time, right company had a role open. But I will still say that if it weren't for the amount of conversations and networking I have, like none of the interviews, I had about 5 potential opportunities just within that 1 month period, which I think that is um, a testament to just how many conversations and stuff I was having with people. And even the role I ended up getting was a result of me applying for it, reaching out directly to the recruiting manager, and then I also knew some former colleagues that were working there, and they helped put in a good word for me. So nothing came just completely organically. There was all some back end work being done that helped a ton.
Yeah. I love that you're sharing some of these tactics that you used. Let me ask you a couple more questions related to that. So
I mean, I
you
can talk
said,
about this all day. So
yeah, yeah. You said you pounded your network. What's so I don't know. Give me an example of like you reach out to somebody and you want to have a conversation just to kind of catch up and just have that touch point. How do you do that? How do you ask for that?
yeah, I think a lot of times people worry too much about what I talk about versus just having a conversation about anything. And
Mhm.
that's what it was for me is, I've got several thousand people that I'm connected with on LinkedIn, and I've got these people that I've met through, at the time I was still ATD chapter president here in Chicago. Um, and so I literally was just reaching out like, hey, I was laid off. I'm trying to figure out what I want to do next. We haven't connected in a while. I'd love to just grab coffee and pick your brain a little bit and just kind of go in with a completely open mind and just see where the conversation took me. Because again, I think whether or not it directly led to an opportunity, I think there's also just the benefit of keeping busy and keeping productive and like feeling like you're still making some type of difference or change, right? Like even I remember the like a weekend I went and got a coffee with somebody, and I called my wife on the way there, and I was like, man, it's so fun to just be going somewhere and like getting a coffee. Because it was again, it just felt like something that was kind of normal, you know what I mean? Um, and I think from a mental health aspect, that was just so good for me and kept me plugging away. I mean, I legitimately worked from basically 7 to 5 every day, just scheduling meetings, having combos. And yeah, those combos were, there wasn't any real structure to them to your question. It was just having the conversation and getting feedback and finding out what are things that they've done to get to where they're at and just all that stuff. Just being an open book.
Yeah, I really admire the discipline and rigor you had for it too. I think that
But
sort of dedication pays off.
I just, sorry, I was looking at the chat. I just saw Molly's question. Isn't that super tiring? Um, yes. I know I think I naturally have a pretty good amount of energy. Celsius helps. Free plug for Celsius. Um, but yeah, I would say it is very tiring, but I think the other thing I've gotten pretty good at in my life is as extroverted and much as I love conversations like this, I am very much like the opposite of this at the end of the day. When 5 o'clock hits or whatever, when I come home, like it's TV or video games or just taking my dog for a walk, headphones in, not talking. My wife makes fun of me all the time because I have such a big network and I know so many people and I'll hop on a phone call or anything with anybody, but then I take our dog for a walk and I don't know the names of any of the dogs in our neighborhood, any of our neighbors, anything because I'm like I don't want to talk to any of you now. This is like I've been doing this
Interesting.
all day. Um, so that's what helps me like recharge to your question, Molly, is I'm pretty darn good at just like when the day's over, I just shut it off. Um, so that I can recharge and then yeah, I mean it's exhausting and it's tiring and I'm usually pretty mentally drained every day. But I also feel like I'm reaping the rewards of that, so it's worth it, you know?
Awesome. So this is like I also personally have been on a bit of a journey to just kind of grow my network and learn more about people in the industry. I joined Frederickson about 5 years ago, and I wasn't in the industry before then. What advice do you have to people who maybe don't have that large network right now? Like, how do you get started? How did you? I mean, your network is huge now, but you had to start from somewhere, right?
I mean, I'm like, I just would say do it. Like, so, don't think about how should you do it. Don't think about like what would I even post if you're trying to build your LinkedIn network, or don't think about like if I join this, do I even have the experience to be able to do it? Like, if they're willing to pull you into the role, or if people are willing to engage with the content you put on LinkedIn, then you're doing it right. Like nobody really knows what they're doing. Like it probably seems like I know what I'm doing because I've been doing it a bunch, but I'm just taking a risk every time I put something out there. And I just hope people like the person that's doing it. You know what I mean? Um, it's I just don't really think you have much to lose. Like, I mean, obviously, like I'm not gonna go on a political tirade on LinkedIn, or I'm not gonna, post stuff that's like super off color. Like then I do have something to lose, namely my job. Um, but when it comes to just like sharing thoughts, sharing perspectives, I always kind of look at it as if I don't share it, nobody's going to know my thoughts anyway. And if I do share it, there might be somebody out there that likes it that can be impacted by it. So I can really only go up. I just need to be brave enough to share it. And so
I,
that's just sort
I
of that's the way I jump at it.
Yeah, no, I love that you said brave. I say this jokingly to people. There might be some people on the call that have been to our happy hours, but whenever see somebody new, a lot of times what I'll tell them is, "Thank you for being brave and coming. Like you were brave and you came out." Because there is an element of courage to it to kind of put yourself out there. But I think it's the sort of thing where it's a lot more. The hang up's a lot more just kind of in your personal like perspective in your head, like others see it as you just kind of reaching out and trying to do something
it
fun and
it
meet people, and that's good.
yeah, for sure. I'll be totally honest with you guys. My the thing I'm probably least comfortable with is going to a like happy hour event where I've got to bounce around and like network one on one or start like that's probably the thing I'm worst at, as much as I probably seem like I'm comfortable just chatting for days. Like when I get into that specific situation where you're like there's groups of two or three people already talking, you just kind of like creepily saunter in and like, hey guys, I'm Jason. Um, I'd much rather either be having like just one-on-one coffee, meet for coffee, or I'd rather just have that group of 100 people just all turn and listen to me talk versus trying to figure out how to like navigate the room. Um, so that's something I've made myself do a ton over the last 4 or 5 years is go to those types of events where you truly have to like you walk into the event and you already see like there's 30 people there and each of them they're all having conversations in little groups of two or three or four and you immediately feel like everybody here knows somebody and I don't know anybody. Who am I even going to talk to?
Hmm.
And I think those have been like just great for me because I'm never going to get better at it if I don't just put myself out there and do it. So yeah, I try to force myself into those a lot.
Yeah. For anybody on the call that's in the Twin Cities, if you come to our happy hour, just tap me on the shoulder. It'll be okay. Like it's cool.
Yeah.
I'll loop you into the conversation. All right, so let's shift a little bit, sort of along the same lines, and talk about branding. And I kind of want to talk both about personal branding because I know I mean, you're pretty big on that, but also about branding as an L&D function to the organization. But we can start with the personal branding first, and it sounds like it's played a pretty powerful role in your career journey as a learning leader. And but tell me a little bit about just kind of what it's meant to you in your career.
I just have found I think people really appreciate honesty and authenticity. The whole like Brene Brown, clear as kind type of mentality of I think you just got to really lean into being who you are and like being honest about who that is. I think like for whatever reason, because I wouldn't pretend to know the answer to this, people seem to like my energy. Like, and they tell me I have a ton of energy and they like my energy. When a lot of times, like, I don't even necessarily feel that or see that from myself. Like, it's the feedback I get, right? So I just think I'm being myself. But I think people just appreciate the authenticity of it and the fact that, like I'm willing to be open and talk about my layoff and things like that because we all go through it. Like I don't really see the benefit of putting on this like facade of I've got everything figured out and I'm perfect at this and you should all aspire to be me or something like that. But what I do tell people, I tell people this in sales a lot too, if we're doing like sales coaching, is you gotta lean into being yourself. You can bleep this out because this is the way I always put it if you want, but like don't try to be me because you'd be a shitty me. Like just the same as I won't try to be you because I'd be a shitty you, right? Like be who you are, but there's things you can like pull from me or pull from others that can help mold like whatever that brand is you're trying to build, like you can certainly put yourself out there on LinkedIn and post every day like that isn't special, unique to me. Now the stuff I might talk about or post about might be different or might have a different tone than what you have, but I think there's some common like practices there that work for everybody, but just really being self-aware enough to understand like where your strengths and weaknesses are and leaning into those and working on the ones that you kind of suck at. That's all you can
Yeah,
do.
yeah. Um, I've got a pair of questions here. The first one's going to be, how did you go about establishing, because you just had this opportunity to introduce yourself into a completely new environment, right? So first, how did you go about establishing yourself to this or new organization you're at? And then I'll ask you about how you're doing it on behalf of your function.
Yeah.
If those things tie together, feel free.
So my first week, maybe 2 weeks there, I basically had nothing but, well, I was depending if I was traveling like to a location or not, but I was either on site or on Teams meeting with somebody pretty much every half hour all day long, every single day, because I just wanted to meet as many of the leaders as I could, get their feedback on, well, let me flip that around to tell them like what my role was and what I was here to hopefully accomplish, but then to get their feedback on where they felt like that would be most needed. And those were for definitely the first couple of weeks. I was having that same exact conversation over and over again with director of X or VP of Y, and um, just making sure that I had enough caffeine and energy in me to make sure that everybody was getting like the full me and not like a sleepy, tired version of it by the time because that conversation wouldn't do any good because I knew that every single person I was meeting at that point, that was my chance to make the first impression. So I wanted to make sure that every single one of them, if they talked to each other about like, hey, I just met this Jason guy, what'd you think of him? That feedback was going to be like, oh man, he's awesome. He's coming in here. He's got great ideas. He's got a ton of energy. He wants to really tackle these things and meet us where we're at and hopefully pull us up to a level that we haven't been at before. So that was really the first big step was I really saw those first, you know, 15 to 30 days as just straight up everybody needs to meet Jason Berry and know what he's all about.
Yeah, build that social
Yeah,
capital. And I think that's key too, right? Because eventually you want to get to the point where you can articulate, get buy-in, and execute a vision for what you want to accomplish at the organization, right? And
right.
this is seems like like a necessary first step to doing that.
Yeah. I mean, because if there's going to be changes or initiatives coming in or trainings or anything like that, like I don't want them to only know me through being the guy whose face is on the video training them. Like I want them to actually know my thoughts. And again, I'm always very honest. Again, not to the point where I'm like getting myself in trouble, but I'm always very honest about like, you guys know that the leadership program here is non-existent right now, so it's not in a good spot, but we can get it there. And just being able to have those like truthful conversations with them about, if we can only do one thing to start, like what would that one thing be? I'm very big on, I tell my team a lot, let's just start with good enough. It doesn't need to be perfect because anything we do right now is going to be better than what's currently there, which isn't anything. So good enough can go a long way, and then we can continue to be flexible and tweak and add and all that kind of stuff. So,
Hmm. How big is your team, by the way?
so at NTG, I've got 3 people right now that report to me, which is very different from when I was at Echo, which was at one point 13 people. So
Hmm.
small but mighty.
Yeah,
But we're making stuff happen, man. It's good.
small but I feel like small but mighty could be like a tagline for L&D generally. Like
I
we should
I
all.
honestly, truthfully would tell you that even though it can be painful at times, a slightly smaller team is probably better anyway, because then when those down times come where you maybe have stuff where you're just working on or you're not hiring new classes or whatever the case is, you're not having to also have as many crappy conversations. And there's usually ways that you can make it work to make sure that the bandwidth is there. So
Yeah.
it's good.
So now I mean, you've heard the need, you've started talking to some of the learning audiences, you've identified some of the initial plans for what you want to do. And you're gonna presumably need continued buy-in, support,
Mhm.
funding from the powers that be, stakeholders, etc. Uh, how do you approach kind of keeping the buy-in from the people whose buy-in you need, and really trying to make them see the vision for what you want to do and why it will solve their problems?
I really, really try to lay it out very clearly and plainly in combinations of Excel and slide decks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I always want to think of it as like, how would I explain this to a 5-year-old?
Mm.
And that's not an insult to anybody I'm explaining it to. It's just if I could legitimately like sit down a 5-year-old and walk them through the basics of what my training program is going to be or what my leadership development program is to be, and they get the concept of it, then I can explain it to anybody, right? And so that's always how I approach everything that I ever create is it clear enough? Like if I show you a slide deck and you have zero context and you don't have any of the notes that are written below it of what I'm going to speak on, could you at least click through it and have a basic understanding of what it is that I'm presenting to you? And if that is true, then I shouldn't have much trouble actually adding context to it and taking along the journey with me. So just making sure that, if I'm going to present something to the executive team and the higher up you get in the corporate setting, the more concerned they're going to be with financial cost and ROI. Can I show that like by tackling specifically our leaders' ability to develop their employees and to teach sales to their salespeople, if that's the group. I know I've only talked about sales this call, but it's top of mind. Um, then I need to show to the executive team like these specific actions are how we're tackling exactly that problem and what my expectations are on what the result should be. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's a really great tactic and a reminder for myself who has a tendency to over explain things. But you can you want to speak the language of your executive stakeholders, right? And then they'll like if they need more, they'll ask you and you'll have that information, right? You don't need to overload it and you have to make sure it's digestible.
Yeah, you just got to show up prepared. Like I'm not going to put everything on a slide deck, but like you just said, I should be prepared enough though that if they ask me about something that I can either could I pull it up quickly to show them or can I rattle it off the top of my head, whatever the case is. But obviously got to go in prepared.
All right, we are getting close to the top of the hour here. I'm want to encourage the audience. Like, do you anybody have anything they're wondering about while we have Jason? And maybe Jason, you too, if you have any questions that you're looking to pull the group on, you can ask anything you like.
Give everybody a minute to. By the way, you can literally ask me about anything. I'm a pretty open book, so it doesn't have to be specific to this topic.
Otherwise, we'll start talking about the Cubs. Is
That
that
staircase hard to
Molly asks, is
navigate.
that staircase hard to navigate?
So funny. I also always I get asked a lot if my background is real. This is real. This is my basement, man cave, whatever you want to call it. Um, no, it's not too hard to navigate. Sometimes for you can't see her, but one of my two dogs is asleep on the couch right now. She has a little if she tries to like turn around at the top, she can struggle a little bit, but no, there's not a firefighter pole. That would be pretty
And
cool though.
oh, okay. Magda's got a question.
What is your best technique for getting funding from the C-suite? How long does it typically take? Uh, I would honestly say I feel like with C-suite, it's always like chicken before the egg. So I realistically will try to build something, do as much of it as I can on my own, and show them like, here's how it worked with this small group. And if you can just give me a little bit more money to make it bigger next year, here's how we can make it better or bigger. So usually I kind of look at things on the L&D side as sort of a 1 year at a time process. Like if I can prove it this year, next year I can get the funding for it. If I can prove it next year on a little bit larger scale, the following year, um, which is why I always tell everybody like if you like little quick wins a lot, L&D might not necessarily be exactly what you want to do because it is the long game. But that's usually I think a lot of times people want to like take my role. Like we need a leadership development program. And so it's very easy for somebody to be like, all right, well, how do I create a leadership development program that's gonna upskill all of our leaders versus let's just focus very specifically on this group of like 20 people first, it works, and then take what we learned from that and then start scaling it out. So maybe next year we can do 60 people, and then the year after that we can do 120, like whatever the case. But if I know that this specific group gains benefit from it this year, it's going to be a lot easier for me to ask for more next year when the time comes. What
Awesome.
tips do you have for getting a large training initiative started and maintaining engagement buy-in throughout? Um, Jill, just for some clarification, when you say large training initiative, like are you referring specifically to any one thing or
Not really. I mean, I'm thinking kind of these longer training initiatives that go beyond, let's make one e-learning course
yeah,
that really need that stakeholder, support and buy-in and can often involve people from across the enterprise to really get things done. So maybe like a full curriculum or a strategy plus, curriculum, that kind of thing.
yeah, okay, that makes sense. Um, the first thing for me is again, I think it's really critical that we always remember that people are busy. Like, do I think it's too much to ask for you to schedule to plan ahead and schedule 1 or 2 hours of your time every month to go through a training? Like, no, of course I don't. I think everybody has that time in their day, but at the same time, I do try to be very like acutely aware that my whole job revolves around training. And for you, your whole job revolves around potentially answering to customers or answering to your boss or finding the financials for the company or what, whatever that role is. So whenever I build out a curriculum like this leadership program, for example, it's 6 months long and it's only one 90-minute to 2 hour session a month for the group. Everything else in between it is like takeaways and then easy, simple little connecting pieces that kind of tie it together before we come back in a month. So all I'm actually really asking for from them is like for pure like time off the floor is 2 hours a month, which isn't much at all. But then giving them things where like I'll their managers, so their branch leaders or whoever they report to will know exactly like what they went through in that course so that when they meet on a weekly basis, they can speak to each other about like here's what I learned in our leadership session this month. Here's some of the takeaways they gave us. Here's where I'm seeing improvement. So that way I've got even though I only have me and one other person that are training this program specifically, our other senior level sales leaders kind of become an extension of the team because they also know what's going on and they can also touch base with these people and find out what's going on. They can give me feedback along with the people that are going through the program. So it's really becomes much more of like how can I specifically make something where like I'm the one in control here, but then throughout the rest of the month it stays top of mind, but it's in like practical ways that are part of their day-to-day job. So they don't I don't want them to just like go through their 2 hour session and then hit the floor and they're like super pumped about it for 2 days and they forget about it until the next 2 hour session. So like one of the things I'm doing with this group is we'll have a weekly leadership journal for them to like basically write down beginning of the week, here's my goals for this week, what I want to tackle, and then at the end of the week just reflect on it really quick on what went well for me this week, what didn't go well, and what do I want to work on for next week. And then when we meet back up for the second month of the program, the first thing we'll do is we'll talk about how everything went this past month, reflect on those journals before we talk about what the next session is going to be. So hopefully that answers that question a little bit, but it's really just trying to like spread it out and make it digestible.
Like
And,
good
and
instructional design, right?
right. And I just don't ever think it's really realistic or honestly that effective to be like, all right, everybody's going to come in for an entire week and go through this leadership program. Because usually what happens then is you go through like this week-long thing that's probably really great and awesome, but then that's it. And so everybody goes back and leadership spikes for 2 weeks and then they all kind of go back to their old habits and their old ways and nothing really changed. So
Um, Jason, I think if you have time, we can go into extra innings here. There's a couple more questions that
yeah, I'm okay
people
if
have.
people want to stay on.
Yeah, but I will say if you have to drop, thank you for being here. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I'll probably be following up with a number of you just to see how things went. But I just want to thank Jason for being my first guest on this series and all of you for attending today. Thank you. Uh, Jason, I wanted to make sure we hit on. So, Georgia asked an interesting question about when you have learners that are varying experience level and something company wide gets rolled out, and you get the experienced people saying, "We've already seen this." How do you think about that kind of challenge?
Um, so if it's truly something they've seen, it might come down more to being a little bit more targeted on who actually gets the training, right? Or potentially dividing them up into like little cohorts that make more sense from a skill level. Usually when we're rolling something new out or like an update to a technology or something like that, in most cases people haven't seen it. But my tactic is always I always train the leaders first and then equip them to be able to train their people so that our leaders become our SMEs on the subject. Because realistically, that's who I want somebody on the floor going to if they have questions, is I want them to be able to go to their leader and get the answer that they need. Like me or my team should really be the last resort. Like we we're here to help put together the materials. We're here to help um, be kind of the experts in how it should be trained or what specifically needs to be hit on. But ultimately, like you want your people going to their leaders because that's who they should trust and learn from. So that's typically how I approach it. Honestly, like you are still, I mean, no matter what, sometimes you're gonna get people in there that are like, this was a waste of my time and I didn't learn anything. I could go either direction on whether or not I actually believe that's true or not. I think people like to say that because a lot of times they didn't learn anything because they had their email up the whole time or they were on their phone the whole time. So I think if you don't want to learn something, you're not going to learn something. Um, but I do try to be a little bit more targeted. Like I'm not usually going over like a basic level training for somebody that's been there for 6 years. Like I can typically make a pretty sound judgment and like I don't need that group doesn't need to go through this, but what we will do is we'll make I'll do a shortened version of it available to watch at their leisure if they do feel like they need to like brush up on those skills, right? So having like this live training, but then also a very quick digestible like 5 minute version that anybody could grab.
Mm. I also like the idea. This is maybe exactly applicable, but like even if you're not learning something new, like it's the opportunity to be that thing and be an expert for other people in the organization on
Mhm.
that thing. So like, we know this isn't for you. We know you know this already, but let's reinforce and have you help lead the way for others, that
Yep.
kind of mentality. I want to ask you one more here. I think Jeanette asked about how you go about assessing people to know where to start. So probably tying into like the travel you've been doing, but and I think she asked in the context of like the
Of
sales.
sales. Yeah, I just
Yeah.
saw it. Um, so if I'm trying to train like current salespeople, it is a lot of like I will try as much as I can to go actually sit with them and just hear them make calls and not even give actual feedback at the time. Like I just don't mind me. I'm a fly on the wall. I just literally want to, I'll usually put it under the guise of like I just want to see how you use our tools day to day and how they help you with making sales calls and things like that and just kind of watch you work. But of course, like in the back of my mind, I'm also just seeing like how are they actually making those calls? How are their conversations? How do they sound? All of those things. But really, if in my opinion, if you're really trying to figure out where people are at from a skill level when it comes to sales, like the only way to really figure that out is to actually sit with them and hear them make phone calls. And if possible, in an environment where you can hear both sides of the phone call. Because what's really valuable is if I can hear what the person on the other side of the phone is saying or asking so that I can hear how they're responding to it. Because then I have that context. So that would be step one. Now, if it's in terms of like these are new hires that we're bringing through the door, um, unless we're specifically hiring like a one-off sales rep that we know has a ton of experience, I would expect every new hire that comes through our door to go through the same level of basic sales because I still don't think in general, I think your great salespeople are few and far between, and everybody could use kind of a reset and foundation to build off of when they come into your organization.
Awesome. All right, everybody. I think we'll wrap it. Thanks again for being here. Thanks again, Jason. This was
Yeah,
awesome. I
it's
learned
fun.
a lot, and I appreciate it. Everybody give Jason a thumbs up or pause or whatever it is. And I hope everyone has a great day, and we'll see you all next time.